Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. The Ukrainian capital was the site of a remarkable demonstration of solidarity today. 13 world leaders, the Prime Minister among them, traveling to Kyiv to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. 3 years ago today, Russia launched its illegal invasion of Ukraine, but the gathering was more than just marking today's anniversary. It was also a show of force against Russia and the United States, as Donald Trump in recent days has adopted the language of Russian disinformation and blamed Kyiv for the deadly war. Take a listen to what we heard today from Justin Trudeau.
We also believe deeply that it's not just about Ukraine. It's about the rules and the values and the principles of sovereignty, of independence, of territorial integrity that protects every country in the world. And we know we're going to have to continue to do more and more in an uncertain world, and Canada will be there. As to how we will be there, we will work with our neighbors on it, but everything is on the table because we need to make sure that might no longer makes right in this world.
In addition to those words, the Prime Minister also made more tangible commitments to Ukraine today. They include 25 additional light armored vehicles, 2 armored combat support vehicles, F-16 flight simulators, and $5 billion in revenues taken from frozen Russian assets. Much needed pledges as the Trump administration signals it will no longer support Ukraine as the U.S. did in the past, and as the United States joined Russia today at the United Nations, voting against a European resolution condemning Moscow for the war and rejecting a call on Russia to return Ukrainian territory that it seized. Alexandra Chyczij is the president of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress. She joins us right now from Toronto. Ms. Chyczij, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Listen, given the policy direction that we have seen from the Trump administration this past week, this change of policy direction, if you will, what does it mean to you to see the Prime Minister, along with other world leaders, gathered in Kyiv to support the Ukrainian cause?
We are incredibly grateful that our Prime Minister has joined EU leaders and the UK to demonstrate so visibly and meaningfully their ongoing support for Ukraine. The abandonment of the United States, not only of Ukraine, but the undermining of the NATO alliance and the UN is difficult to see, and I think it's a moral stain on the United States.
Do you feel as if the United States has changed direction and there's no turning its course back to what it was?
Well, I think we can hope that the American people will wake up and begin to protest loudly through their congressmen and women their disappointment with what their president is doing. I mean, we know that not all Americans supported President Trump in the election. And it reminds me, honestly and terrifyingly, of fascist Germany. You know, we all know the famous quote, and when they came for me, there was no one left to speak for me. And it's this apparent capitulation of the American people in bowing and cowering before a president who is bent on destroying not only their way of life, but the international world order.
International world order, which we've heard time and again ever since Russia began its illegal invasion 3 years ago. You know, Donald Trump did take to social media today, and in addressing the meeting in Kyiv today, he talked about securing a critical minerals deal with Ukraine to help get back some of the money the United States has spent in support of Ukrainian defense. And he goes on to say, and this is again from his media post, he says, I am in serious discussion with President Vladimir Putin of Russia concerning the ending of the war and also major economic development transactions which will take place between the United States and Russia. Talks are proceeding very well. Underline that word, major economic development transactions. What do you take from that public declaration? Clearly touting something that's going to come down the pipes with Russia rather than securing Ukrainian victory.
He's made a deal with Putin. That is clear. I mean, we already know that he has probably been negotiating with Putin over Ukraine's rare earth minerals that are located in the territories that are being occupied by Russia today. So at the same time that he's blackmailing Zelensky into accepting a deal that Zelensky has thankfully said he's not going to accept because it will mean generations of Ukrainians paying for it, and there's no security guarantee in it. He has made the same deal with Putin, and likely for gas and oil at bargain basement prices. I mean, this is a man who is completely transactional.
Transactional, as you say. So where does this leave Ukraine, though? Because if Donald Trump and his administration is, as you say, transactional, compare that to the previous administration, which had this, which was holding up this ideal of a democratic country fighting for its democratic survival. Where does this leave Ukraine then, if the United States sides with the Kremlin and not Ukraine?
Well, Ukraine has no choice but to rely on the EU, the UK, and Canada. And thankfully, they are there today demonstrating that support. We know that the combined GDP of Europe is certainly sufficient to match the aid that was provided, the military aid that was provided previously by the United States. And that is who Ukraine has to put their faith in. And of course, Canada is well advised to be part of that alliance because we have been threatened by a NATO neighbor. Trump calling us the 51st state is a direct threat to our sovereignty. And of course, threatening to take over Greenland is a threat to Denmark. This is unheard of, that one NATO member is threatening other NATO countries.
Mm-hmm. Now, Canada did, as we said, leading into, has made several new commitments today in its meeting in Kyiv. What do you want to see from Canada going forward? Beyond the commitments made today, where would you like to see this country go forward? If the United States is wavering in their support, what do you think the priority needs to be for Canada?
I think it needs to be in Canada building up its defense industry. Canada needs to defend itself. I don't think we should take for granted that Trump wouldn't resort to something more than economic pressure. I used to worry about a Russian or a Chinese submarine surfacing in James Bay. Now it could just as well be an American submarine. We cannot rely on the Americans to defend us or defend our North. We must do that ourselves, and we must do it with reliable partners like the EU and the UK. It's in our self-interest to do that.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think what's interesting about the discussion this past week is when you hear it from officials in negotiations, they talk about things like critical minerals, they talk about armament, they talk about financial funding. But Ukrainians certainly have a far more intimate picture because they know this has been about people and people losing lives on the ground in Ukraine. Where does your thought go to right now about the Ukrainian people? Are you scared for them? Are you discouraged for them? How are you feeling right now?
Initially, I was frightened and very sad. Certainly, people in Ukraine are aghast at the betrayal of the United States of America, in whom they placed their trust. But Ukrainians are resilient. We can't forget that everyone, including the Western allies, wrote them off they gave them 3 days to survive the Russian assault. And here we are 3 years later, still standing. I believe that Europe, the UK and Canada will stand with Ukraine and that Ukraine will prevail.
Alexandra Chyczij, I appreciate the time this evening. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Michael.